This week we're back on home turf, and you know we go to all kinds of historical sites, and today we are in Higginsville, Missouri at the Missouri Confederate Memorial State Historic Site. It was conceived as a place of refuge and residence for indigent Confederate veterans, their spouses, and minor children. It ran from 1891 to 1950 when the last veteran, John T. Graves, died at the age of 108. His headstone simply says, John T. Graves, last of Shelby's men. It became a Missouri State Park after that, and they maintained the Confederate Cemetery, a national cemetery, a chapel, a cottage, a farmhouse, and one of the old hospitals. This cemetery contains 723 graves, including one very famous, very infamous man. Oh, wow. That's hateful. That is very weathered and faded, and that needs to be replaced, but you can still read it. In June of 1906, the United Daughters of the Confederacy erected the large granite monument that dominates the cemetery. The statue was inspired by the Lion of Lucerne statue in Lucerne, Switzerland, which commemorates the Swiss guards that were massacred by a mob while protecting the French King Louis XV during the French Revolution. Let's just go up here real quick and see this guy, this lion. The lion is mortally wounded, yet proud and defiant, is an example of the symbol of the Confederacy. The lion's paw rests upon the seal of the Confederacy, which features a mounted George Washington surrounded by a wreath of agricultural products vital to the South. It costs $5,000, weighs approximately 50 tons, and it stands 18 feet tall. And while you can see, he is mortally wounded right there in his back. And so that sign right there, it says, Lord God of hosts, be with us, yet lest we forget. Lest we forget. And that is very important because there are a lot of people that do not want any kind of Confederate memorials or monuments and stuff. But if we get rid of them all, we're going to forget about it, and it's going to be erased from our collective memory. And that's just not a good thing. Plus, this is a cemetery. This is sacred. So this really wasn't about the Civil War. It was really about taking care of human beings who couldn't take care of themselves. And these people happened to be Confederate soldiers. They didn't have pensions. Union soldiers did. They got pensions, but the Southern soldiers, they didn't. Or if they did, it was so minuscule that they could not support themselves or their families. And some of them were wounded. And while they were on the losing side, thank goodness, they were still human beings that needed to be cared for. And I believe that this site is important for that reason and that reason only. And a lot of these will tell you whose company they were in. So that one says Hayes, Missouri Cavalry. This one right here says 4th Missouri Infantry. That's Matthias Bus. I believe that says Bus, B-U-S. And they're all marked this way. We are looking for James Robert Wendy Cummins because he is an interesting fella. And I'm not really sure where he is. There he is right there, James McCummins. James Cummins. He was a member of the James Group. He was involved in the train robberies at Winston and Blue Cut, Missouri. And he lived near Kearney, Missouri, and was a known horse thief. And he rode with Quantrill, most often with Quantrill's Lieutenant Bloody Bill Anderson. And this man may also have been involved in the plot to kill Jesse James because his sister married Robert Ford, who did kill Jesse James. It says, one of Shelby's men. Very, very cool. Okay. The only other grave I want to find, is Quantrill's. It is scorching hot out here today. Okay, that's the grave I have been looking for. one of the three graves of William Quantrill. Now, I'm not exactly sure what is buried here, but it's not his whole body. It's definitely not his skull. His skull, I believe, is in Ohio. I have read that he has an arm and a shin bone here, but then I also read that there was a couple of other body parts. I'm going to find out 100% sure. William Quantrill was the leader of a violent group of Confederate guerrillas known as Quantrill's Raiders. Those members included brothers Frank and Jesse James and Bloody Bill Anderson. Quantrill was responsible for the massacre of Lawrence that took place on August 21st, 1863, killing 150 unarmed men and boys. Quantrill, who had been shot during a skirmish in Louisville, Kentucky, died on June 6, 1865, and he was buried in St. John's Cemetery there in Louisville. Some 20 years later, the strange odyssey and disbursement of his bones began. In 1887, Quantrill's mother arrived in the company of her son's boyhood friend, William W. Scott. They requested to take the remains back to Dover, but they were refused. However, it was agreed that the grave would be dug up and the contents viewed. Scott took the skull to Miss Quantrill, who identified it based on a chipped tooth. Under cover of darkness, the entire box was stolen. Scott delivered the box to Quantrill's mother to bury it. However, all the bones were not present and accounted for. Scott took the skull and a few bones and tried unsuccessfully to sell them. It wasn't until 1976 when the skull of Quantrill was sent to the Dover Historical Society and reunited with those bones. Eventually, one of Quantrill's arms, a lock of hair, and a shin bone were donated to the Kansas Historical Society, who turned them over to the Confederate Veterans Home. They buried them on October 24th, 1992, and over 300 people attended the funeral. And he is responsible for the massacre of Lawrence. He's not a very good person, in my opinion. But he was very active up here in Missouri, especially in western Missouri, because there wasn't a really big Confederate presence up here at the start of the war. And so he kind of came up here and recruited. One of the people he recruited was Bloody Bill Anderson. He was in Kansas, and he got him. And together they did some pretty nasty stuff. But here's his grave, and they were afraid that someone was going to come and dig up part of his body that's buried here. And so in 1992, they wrapped it in plastic, placed it inside a red plastic cooler, put it inside a replica 19th century coffin, draped it with a Confederate flag, and then poured concrete all over it. So you could dig it up, but you're going to dig down to concrete. Nobody wants to do that. Among the first buildings to be constructed at the Confederate Home of Missouri were small frame houses making up Cottage Row. These three-room cottages were located along both sides of the road and served as independent living for veterans and their families. They were located on 100 by 200 feet lots, and it was common to see large vegetable gardens and fruit trees in the yards. Of the original cottages, only one survives and now serves as the site administrator's residence. This chapel was built at the end of Cottage Row in 1892 at a cost of $1,200. In 1913, the chapel was moved to a more central location to accommodate an aging resident population. 65 years later, it was moved again to its present location. And this chapel is one of two remaining Confederate chapels in the United States. The other one is in Richmond, Virginia. Look at the ceiling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, rods going across.
Well, I was talking about the actual ceiling itself.
And I'm talking about the rods.
Uh-huh. Why are those rods there? Is that?
Hold the walls together.
Oh. Well, this has been moved 3 times, I believe. This church has been moved 3 times. That was the back of one of the hospitals. I think that's original too. But it's all boarded up and you can't get in. We can't even look through windows. Look at that. So there's this farmhouse, and then right over here, this is, I believe, one of the hospitals. I'm not entirely sure. I'll have to double check on that, but that's the back of that building. We're gonna go around and see the front. And that is one of the hospitals that was built here in 1922. And the farmhouse, that housed laborers and farmhands. Huh, okay. Well, we'll try. I mean, we're not trying to open the door. We'll just try to peek in so we can see. That's what it looks like. Oh, that's kind of interesting looking in there. Huh. Barn was probably went to the house. Okay. So another window. Begging to be looked into. After the home closed in the mid-1950s, the property was divided between two state agencies, the Higginsville Habitation Center, run by the Missouri Department of Mental Health, and the Missouri State Park Board, who maintain the historical site. I just want to see what this little boulder here says. What? Yeah, you do have to see what all the plaques say, because that's how we learn on this channel. Because we go to historical sites and we learn what they can teach us. So we have to check out all the sites dedicated to the memory and valor of the Confederate soldiers, presented by Missouri Division United Daughters of the Confederacy. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you guys learned something, and I hope you enjoyed yourself, because I certainly did. Take a moment to hit that like button, and as always, I will see you all next time. Bye now.